My first memory of Kathleen's determination to fight for somebody else came early in my life. As a result of her work with a young man who'd had a brain injury, Kathleen decided, at age 15, that she would plan a fundraiser for people struggling with brain injuries and stroke. So she announced this to my mother with all the assurance that she could make it happen. And she did. She arranged to hold it at our church. She arranged for the games, prizes, and volunteers, one of whom was a member of the Minnesota Vikings. And it was a huge success, which didn't surprise anybody in our family. There are 8 Hawk children. To my twin and to me, Kathleen held a most exceptional spot in our family. She is a few years older and the only other girl. So we watched and tried to emulate everything that she did. It is our great fortune that she set such a compassionate example. To this day, we are still working to grow up to be Kathleen. Please help me welcome Kathleen Hawk Norman. Okay, that is so wrong. I wasn't told any of that. So, start me off verklempt, Mary, thank you. I want to thank NADP for inviting me here tonight. This is the second time that I've addressed your group. So for those of you who have already heard me, Dick and Christy, pretend like it's all new and, clap at the appropriate times. But I couldn't resist the opportunity to come and celebrate old Sparky's retirement. Let me tell you a bit of how I came to this fight. In 1996, I was the jury foreperson in a capital murder case in New Orleans. I stood once and said guilty. I stood again and said death. Going into the trial, I wasn't sure how I felt about the death penalty, but I knew that it was the law, and I knew that jurors did not make laws, they imposed them. I certainly was traumatized sending a man to death row, but I truly believed that Dan Bright was a bad guy and had committed a brutal murder. There was one small problem, however. As it happens, Dan Bright didn't commit the murder, and in 2000 I came to learn that I had sentenced an innocent man to death. I was seriously shaken, but silly as it seems now, I still believed in the system. A mistake had been made. I figured we'd march back into the courtroom, we'd explain what had happened, and it would get fixed. I testified twice in the effort to get Dan a new trial, but it didn't sway the court. That was back when I lived where far too many Americans still live, with the illusion of justice. The evidence proving Dan's innocent was not some legal technicality. Certainly there are instances of honest mistakes that put innocent people in jail, but there was nothing benign about what happened to Dan. There was police misconduct. There was an incompetent and probably drunk defense attorney. There was prosecutorial misconduct. And the FBI was in possession of a document that not only said that Dan didn't kill Murray Barnes, it named the real killer. This was John Ashcroft's FBI, and they didn't share or play well with others. It literally took a federal case wherein we sued the FBI for the release of the document. Finally ordered by a federal judge to produce this document, they gave us a heavily redacted version that blacked out everything except the line that said, Dan Bright did not kill Murray Barnes, blank did. And the rest of the document was a sea of black marker. A further court order forced the FBI to produce an unredacted version of the document, and because hope springs eternal, armed with this powerful evidence, we were back in the courtroom before the same court judge, and he said to us, production of exculpatory evidence does not, in and of itself, warrant a new trial. I was stunned, and at this point, seriously pissed off. I gathered friends and made a plan to be a royal pain in the court's butt until Dan Bright was given a new trial. It took 4 more years and over 15 court appearances with my group of friends increasing with every court visit, being shot down for one reason or another until finally in 2004, the Louisiana Supreme Court threw Dan's case out and ordered a new trial. The ruling was unanimous. Given there was no evidence to retry Dan and plenty of evidence to say that he didn't commit the crime, they opted not to retry his case. Finally, on June 14th, 2004, Dan was a free man. That was also the first day that I was allowed to speak to him. His lawyers had insisted that we keep our distance in case it would be necessary for me to testify again. For the first time, we met, and we met in the same courtroom where I had sentenced him to death. Dan was still in his prison orange garb, shackles on his wrists and ankles, confined to his waist by a leather belt. I approached him and reached out to shake his hand, without thinking of his limited mobility. But he was honorable. He just took my hand in his, and he looked me in my eyes, and he said, "This isn't on you. You can't carry this. This was never your fault." Being brave and collected, I bursted into tears. We stood there holding hands and crying, both of us. If this ordeal didn't change my life, Dan's next words certainly did. "Do me a favor," he said. Duh. "Don't forget the others. There are others, innocent men. Please don't forget them." It's been a remarkable journey. I didn't need to be friends with Dan Bright, but he surprised me. I really liked this man. We had this weird connection that you might think we would want to put behind us and move forward, but we didn't. We took some tentative first steps, a coffee here and a lunch there, and slowly we got to know each other, and I grew to respect him. This is a good and a decent man. I even came to understand something of the street life that he knew before being sentenced to death. Like a lot of poor minority men, drugs were a way of life for Dan. It's why he was on the cops' radar. But they didn't bust him for drugs. They framed him for murder. I asked him once what it was like being sentenced to death, and he said, "It saved my life." Everyone he knew from his days on the street was either dead or in prison. I started volunteering with the Innocence Project and learned so much about humanity and forgiveness. The gifts that I have received from these men are immeasurable. In Louisiana, 25 people have been exonerated, and together they've served 404 years in prison for crimes they did not commit. Let me tell you about some of these remarkable people. Greg Bright, who is no relation to Dan, was 20 years old when he was arrested for murder. He had no police record of any kind. They told him he committed this murder with Earl Truvia, who was then 17. The two had never met. After 13 minutes of deliberation, they were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life at hard labor. The only evidence against them, an unmedicated schizophrenic with auditory and visual hallucinations, and none of that evidence was presented at trial. And as remarkable as that story may be, it's not what defines this man for me. Greg had to drop out of school when he was 11 because his stepfather was too ill to work, and his mother had to support the family. She went door to door in New Orleans for a diaper service, collecting dirty diapers and bringing them somewhere and returning clean diapers to support her family. Even having had as much school as he would have at 11, Greg never learned how to read, so clearly society had already failed him. His stepfather insisted that he read him the Lord's Prayer several times a day. Since he couldn't read, he just held the Bible and recited from memory. At one point, he complained to his mother, asking her why he had to always read the Lord's Prayer to his stepfather. And his mother said, maybe it's not for him, maybe it's for you. At 12 or 13, he just thought his mother was goofy. Fast forward to Greg's conviction. He's sitting in Angola, and he's receiving mail that he can't read. There was an old guy. There was an old guy there that everyone called Pops. Pops walked around with a Bible in his hands, so Greg assumed that he could read. So he went up to him and made a proposition. He would trade him cigarettes if Pops would read his